Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another devlog for Dauphin, my 2D RPG about a marine biologist that I'm building with the Godot engine. I'm joining you today on Monday, March 25th, just after work and Moose's evening walk, and I'm really happy to be kicking things off today in particular because this week is feeling like kind of a reset for me. Last week, I had the privilege of traveling all across the United States from Virginia to California, where I spent a few days driving around for work before the fun part, which was spending a few days at my first ever GDC in San Francisco, which was awesome. I wish I had taken more video on this trip, but I got to meet up with so many members of the core Godot team and W4, as well as so many indie and AAA devs and other content creators. My highlight of the trip would have to be the Godot meetup that we had at the GitHub headquarters on Wednesday night, which was really just a showcase of how massive the Godot community is, but also how welcoming they are. So to Emmy and all the other Godot folks who made that happen and who invited me, thank you so much. I had a blast. With that trip complete, I have to say it's good to be back home. Unsurprisingly, coming from a game development conference, I'm super charged up to get back to work on Dauphin, and I also happen to be starting a new project at work and have some fun new projects planned around the house. What better time to kick off a devlog? If you watched my last video, you'll know that the last episode in the series here was a really exciting one for me because I spent a lot of time overhauling the visuals of Dauphin's water as well as what's underneath the water and came up with a great result. This week, I want to continue leaning into this theme of visual improvements by focusing on what we see above the water. And more specifically, what I'd like to knock out this week is a weather system to complement Dauphin's existing day-night cycle. If we look at my Notion board here, you can see how I've attempted to task this out. I want to support full and partial cloud cover that affects the way the islands look when the player is exploring. I want to have a wind effect that affects things like trees. I'd like to support rain and storms and maybe even something like hurricanes, and also have the tides be something that is affected by both the weather and the time of day as you'd expect. Now, I seriously doubt I can get through all that this week, but I am excited to see what we can do. It is 6:30 at this point, definitely time for dinner and probably a relaxing evening after a long day at work. We'll catch up first thing tomorrow. Hey y'all, quick check-in here on Thursday morning. It's been a pretty busy start to the week with this new project at work, but I have made some good foundational progress on the weather system, so let's take a look. So first things first, I want to show you what is effectively the brain of the weather system in Dauphin, and this is a class called Weather Manager, and I don't have a class name here because this is an autoload singleton. The reason this is an autoload singleton is that I want all of this logic to change between weather effects to continue running as the player is changing scenes, moving between islands or underwater scenes or entering building interiors. All this will continue to run and the weather will act independently as you'd expect. Inside this Weather Manager class, we have really two important pieces that control the weather. We have the notion of forecasts and the notion of conditions, and what forecasts do is combine conditions to create a unique visual experience for the player. So for forecasts, we have things like clear, clear and breezy, overcast, overcast and breezy, rain, thunderstorm, and hurricane. For conditions, we have three enums for clouds, precipitation, and wind. And as you can expect, these forecasts up above combine these three types of conditions to create these unique weather effects. All of that magic happens in my set conditions helper function towards the bottom of this class. The main function of this class is just to change forecasts on a timer, basically, and when that forecast changes, we need to update the active conditions. So you can see for a clear forecast, we have no clouds, no precipitation, and still wind conditions. But if we scroll all the way down here to something like thunderstorm, you'll see that we have overcast clouds, it is raining, and we have gusty wind conditions. Now it's great that we're able to switch between and set these weather conditions, but that's not actually doing anything in the game world in which the player is playing. We need some way to be able to read those conditions and create those visual effects. And for that purpose, I have created this weather controller, which is now enforced as a child of my base stage. If we jump in here, you'll see that we already have two children, a cloud controller and a precipitation controller, and as you may have guessed, a wind controller is soon on the horizon. The idea here is that this weather controller reads those conditions from the weather manager and uses these various subcontrollers to create those visual effects. As an example of all this coming together, I have just set the weather for partly cloudy conditions, which is some functionality I have built out so far for the cloud controller. If we start to run around, we should see some big clouds looming overhead and scrolling across the screen, which you can see here. So this is a great example of functionality that's controlled by that cloud controller. What I'm actually doing when we switch to the partly cloudy condition is telling the cloud controller to spawn some of these clouds and control how they move across the screen. As another example, here is the current state of my rain effect, which I just started working on this morning and only spent about 20 minutes on, so needs a lot of work, but you can see what combining two weather conditions looks like here. We have overcast clouds, which rather than having big floaty clouds, just darkens the entire scene. And of course, we have a very goofy work in progress rain particle effect. So I like the way this weather system is turning out so far. Being driven by those individual conditions, I can combine those to create some really cool weather patterns for the player to experience. So next steps is to continue building out those weather conditions, and we'll catch up when I've made more progress. Hey everyone, quick check-in here. It is now the following Wednesday morning. We zoomed right through Easter weekend. I actually took a couple days off of development and filming while family was in town. But at the start of this new week, I'm back on the wagon and I've actually made some cool progress as you saw on the rain. So I want to quickly show you how I'm doing this. So within my precipitation controller, which is another child of my weather controller, we pretty much house all of the logic required to modify these particle systems that are used to create rain. Nothing too crazy here in this file itself. You can see we have different particle number targets based on the specific rain condition, whether that's showers, rain, or a downpour. And down here in the body of this file, we have very much the same code that we have in the cloud controller. We have a setup function to pass in the type of precipitation that we want to show. And then down here in my toggle function, we're turning that precipitation on if we need to, and then setting the amount value on these particle systems to the particular target that we want. What I'm really stoked about here is these little splashes that I was able to create when these raindrops hit the ground. And this was actually very easy to configure using these two GPU particles 2D nodes in the tree. The first of these is my rain particles, which is the vertically falling raindrops here. And then we have the sub-emitter, which is basically the little explosive splash. The way to set this up is to go into my rain particles and set the sub-emitter to this second particle emitter, which just creates the splash effect. Then within the sub-emitter field of my properties, I can set the mode to @end, basically meaning at the end of the lifetime of these individual raindrops, we want to fire that splash sub-emitter. And as you can see, this is a pretty cool result. That's it for now, just a quick update. I do really want to try and get this wrapped up by this weekend, so we're going to see if we can knock out the wind effect next. We'll catch up for hopefully one last update here soon. Hey everyone, welcome back. We have made it to the end of the week. Unsurprisingly, I still have a lot of work I want to do on the weather system, so I'm not ready to call it done yet, but I have made a bunch of cool progress that I think will be perfect to wrap up this devlog. First things first though, I've got to show you this cool new addition to my desktop. So as you saw from all that B-roll, I now have a new aquarium on my desk. I have been wanting to put one back for a while since breaking down my old 5-gallon, and I've also been wanting to switch things up, kind of moving away from my typical jungle cube style setup that I always have in favor of something new and a bit more challenging, and I'm really happy with what I have here. Rather than just loading this thing up with fast-growing tall plants as I usually do, I've opted for a better mix of natural hardscape and some smaller plants to complement it. My goal here, which you can hopefully tell, was kind of a riverbank aesthetic. shallow with stones that have been smoothed out by running water, and maybe a big tree root here that's plunging into the substrate. I've gone with a pretty big filter as well to create a stronger water flow within the tank. One thing I have kept the same here is the foundation of this aquarium, which is sifted organic potting soil, which I've tried to hide from the front of the aquarium facing my desk under the top layer of sand here. This should provide all the nutrients my plants need and ultimately keep this tank very low maintenance with no need for CO2, which is definitely my preference. Anyway, we'll get back to Dauphin now, but I was really excited to share that, and I'm looking forward to sharing the growth of this tank over the course of future devlogs as I've done with my aquariums in the past. And I'd love to hear what you guys think of the setup, so let me know in the comments. Alright, so back to Dauphin for the final update on my weather system here, which revolves around the wind controller. So the new wind controller really has two jobs: to keep track of the overall global wind speed in the world, and also to apply gusts, which we'll hopefully see in just a second here. When those gusts happen, you'll see some particles fly across the screen here, and we'll also see some effects take place with other objects in the world, like this tree. You'll see that just in kind of a base state, this tree is slowly now moving back and forth, which I'm doing with a shader, and this is because of the low overall global wind speed caused by these breezy conditions set by this weather forecast. When one of those gusts happens and wind speed increases, we'll actually see an increase in the amount that this tree waves back and forth, which will be easier to see in the next part of this demo. Back in the same spot here during a thunderstorm forecast, we can see some of the different effects that wind has on the world. In this case, our base wind speed is higher, so this is swaying more by default, and during a gust, which happens far more often during a thunderstorm, we see the tree start to sway more, and also the rain particles start to fall more horizontally, and these respond in real time to those changing wind conditions, which is very cool in my opinion. I think the most important design decision here that allows for these cool interactions between weather systems was having the global brain of the weather manager, live as an autoload singleton that's accessible to everything. So there are lots of examples of this as we just saw, but yet another one is here in my cloud controller when I'm setting the speed of the clouds that they use to travel across the screen. I could just set this to a constant value, but instead I'm actually looking at the current wind condition of that global weather manager and increasing the cloud speed as things get more windy. So this is like a very small detail that most players probably won't notice, but something that I think is really cool. There's obviously a lot more to be done here between polishing all the effects you just saw and adding new effects for things like thunder and lightning, and of course sound effects, which I'm very far behind on. But overall, I think this is great progress towards a weather system that I think is very interesting and hopefully sets Dauphin apart in just a very small way from other 2D RPGs in this genre. I really hope y'all enjoyed this episode as much as I really enjoyed working on something brand new these past 2 weeks. As always, I want to give a shout out to the folks who support this channel and Dauphin's development on Patreon. Grommy supporters currently are Kyle Van Riper, Jess Sargo, and Samuel SVD. And if you are a Cherry Shrimp supporter or higher, keep an eye out on Patreon here. I'm going to post a GitHub gist with all the code of these 3 weather controllers and the overall weather manager if you're curious. Thanks so much for watching, and keep an eye out for the next episode in which we will be returning back underwater to complete our visual overhaul by hopefully making the underwater scenes look way cooler. I'll see you then.